Ah, the first flower of spring. Yes, periwinkle. And the daffodils are coming up. Anyway, yeah, it's February 2nd. So what a joke. That stuff is in for a rude awakening, I'd say. But anyway, yeah, the weather really is just outstanding for this time of year. So I think I'll post this as a response to Fred on his You Doubled channel. See if we can get some sort of conversation there. It's on the subject of this copyright stuff and the right to publish. And I think he's conflating two separate subjects. I mean, one being censorship, and the other one being, the right to tread on other people's material, on their art, or on their all rights reserved, unless you have a fair use. And, I just think that's a mistake. Thunderfoot's not being censored by YouTube. Thunderfoot's not being censored because he's saying something somebody wants, or some force wants to stop. He's being censored, or he's being attempted to have what he's saying thrown back, because he's using somebody else's property in a malicious way. In a way that doesn't really qualify as respectful enough to be a fair use. It really is irritating that this concept of fairness, that people are just so oblivious to it. I mean, they really don't get what fairness is. They think it's fair that rich people pay half the amount of tax on the gains they make from ownership than a man who works 8 hours a day pays on his profit. They think that's fair, that the rich man should pay less taxes sitting on his couch earning income than a working man should pay. I mean, it's just, you're saying, how could that possibly be fair? It's insane. They think falling out of a rich man's vagina should be enough of a day's work, and somebody should be rewarded for that. And they think that's fair. Well, anyway, this time I'm editorializing completely different subjects. Damn, there's a lot of rubbish in my way here. Somebody's got to work on this path. Somebody, maybe the person who uses it, should have to fix it. Oh, that would be me. Anyway, see, it does discourage other people. That's the only good thing about keeping it crappy, is that no one else will use it. So I have it all to myself. Anyway, where was I? So anyway, alright, so the Thunderfoot issue comes down to a couple of issues. I mean, I think just in absolute terms, it's wrong to, in any way, buffoon on somebody else's content. Unless you videotaped it yourself, unless you own the tape of them, you really don't have a right to take their content off of some other publishing site and pervert it, quote mine it, and distort it, and then republish it. Republication rights are the copyright holder's rights. And if you're not going to do something fair to that content, you just don't have the right to it. And to me, it's not fair to sit there and require somebody to say, oh, what, you mean to fight back? I have to, make oatmeal come out of your mouth? I mean, I'm not going to, we're going to have a Photoshop war. That's going to be how we're going to argue. Is we're going to Photoshop on top of each other? I mean, that's a nonsensical door, in my opinion, to allow even to let it open any more than it has to open. And Thunderfoot would be perfectly happy if that's all the intellectuals did, is throw, tomatoes at each other with graphic technology. So fuck the argument. Fuck anything like respect for another person's right to make their argument. Now, just whoever's the most creative, whoever can put the other guy in the worst tutu wins. I mean, as a premise, as a foundation for what we would want, that is, in my opinion, a non-starter. We don't want that. So there's got to be something like respect built into the law. And I think the idea of intent is important. And I think the law is good enough the way it is if we could just get to the law. But you can't get to the law. You can't get to the protections of the law. Because of the justice system is made for corporations and the rich. It isn't made for people. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject too. So anyway, I think your sympathies for Thunderfoot's plight is totally misplaced. He took the risk of using someone else's content and then complained. I mean, fuck that. I mean, if somebody DMCA's his content when he's not using anybody else's content, well, then he's got to complain. Shit. But people like myself are entitled to their opinion until proven otherwise by actual court cases. That this isn't behavior that's protected by the law. That intent is important. And you have to show respect for the content if you're going to use it. You have to respect it. That's part of being fair. In every circumstance where the word fair is going to be used, it's going to be used with the understanding that respect comes with fairness. And Thunderfoot doesn't show the minimum amount of respect for the content he abuses. He doesn't use it, he abuses it. And I think that can be proven in court. So anyway, the other subject is this idea of, having some mechanism to protect people who wish to publish their art and not be censored. And to me, that's a completely different subject than people re-editing somebody else's material. But then it also touches on the subject of copyright, which I often talk about, where for the uses of artistic expression, people should have a right, after a reasonable amount of time, to use the art that is in our culture, to be able to tread without worrying about, Andy Warhol's relatives pulling his skeleton out of the ground and trying to beat you over the head with it, or some kind of crap like that. There's huge ironies there, just because, Warhol treaded on other people's copyright all over the place. But anyway, it's not the point of what I'm saying. But anyway, I think there needs to be changes in copyright and patent law, just because it will be a huge boom in terms of creating huge efficiencies in the creation of art. The remaking of it, the fixing of it, even the modernizing of it. It's almost like we have a law that says you can't take parts off an old car and put them on a new car. And that's a stupid law. And there would be huge efficiencies in getting rid of a law that stupid. So anyway, that's a whole other issue also. But I'd still argue that people have a right to preserve the integrity of their art. They have a right to prevent people who have a malicious intent from harming it. And clearly it comes down to this intent point. That, you really have to measure intent. Yeah, and that can be done. So anyway, so again on censorship though, and the distributed network thing, like I said, I'm for that, but if all it's going to be used by is people who are trying to escape the law and escape accountability for the property they've stolen, well, that's no good either. Because to say, well, I'm not going to do anything about it until the cops show up, well, that's not going to happen. That lots of abuse can happen before the cops are going to show up. So I think you have to be I just don't think that ideal washes with reality. There really has to be some other editorial mechanism that is invoked, but that it has built into its structure a huge incentive to fault with the producer, rather than a corporation's interests. And that's where the line has been broken. I think the whole thing would be quite reasonable if there weren't all these divergent interest. If everybody's interest was the public interest, which is make everything available in an appropriate context, that is, have things, for mature audiences, available to mature audiences and that kind of thing. Then it's, like I said, that's the game. It's just having something, with a stated intent to have no other interest but a public interest. Because there really isn't a public interest in allowing people to maliciously hurt other people. And so content that clearly crosses that line, like a snuff film or something, you got to draw a line somewhere. I mean, you really do. I don't know if snuff film's probably not a good place to draw the line, because that's a past crime. Can't undo it. But even some circumstance where somebody's humiliated by something, and then other people just keep taking that and humiliating them further. That's not a good example either, because that's sort of tough shit. Well, anyway, I think you get my point. It's something that's going to incite some sort of harm against somebody. I'm not thinking of a good example off the top of my head, but they're probably out there. There should be a mechanism that you're not going to wait for the cops to show up. I mean, if I was hosting content, I don't need the cops to show up to say, I'm not going to let some guy download a movie that was released yesterday. I mean, what the fuck is that? I mean, I hate the big media corporations. I hate MGM. I hate all those companies, but what, I should facilitate the theft of their material? That's bullshit. Where was I going with this? So anyway, that whole subject does get kind of interesting. So I want to get back to the nuances of the law, though, because that's where it gets so... it would be interesting if you could get a case to court. And it's so hard to do that. And it's so hard to get a court to actually rule on anything, even when cases get to court. These judges are morons. They can't write decisions anymore. It's just a joke. So anyway, in the terms of service, for your partnership, there is this clause. It basically says you can't use material you don't own explicit rights to. And they include the word, they have a little phrase in there, use and monetization. And so even that, there's little tricky wording in a sentence. And so people are so desperate to give Thunderfoot the benefit of the doubt that they're perverting that to mean that the only use that's prohibited is use that involves monetization. And it's doing exactly the opposite. It's basically saying your use agreement can't be some sort of open source use agreement that says you can use it for your personal use and not for something else. Or you can use it for not for profit use, but you can't use it for profit use. And there are lots of clauses like that where the use is permitted, but you don't have a make money use permit. And that's all the statement in the sentence is basically saying, is that your use has to include monetization. Meaning that if you're going to get use rights from somebody, it has to be part of the agreement that they understand that you may make profit from what you're using. And but everybody's going to, they'll pervert the wording to suit their agenda, and it just becomes some war, like they're fighting for the right of free speech, and all it is the right to throw tomatoes, and it's bullshit. Free speech, I've said this before, but there is no free speech. Just like an anarchy doesn't work. If you have the freedom to do whatever you want, you have less freedom. Because in that circumstance, you give everybody else the right to do whatever they want. And what they're going to want to do is rape your wife and molest your children. And so where's your freedom? Your kid will never know a walk in the park. And you're going to have your wife, you're going to have to pay a guard all day. And it's going to have to be neutered, of course, or you're not going to trust it. I mean, so it's going to cost you $1 million. Where's your freedom? You don't have any. And the same thing's true of speech. There is no free speech. If I don't have a right to protect my speech from malicious abuse, there's no freedom of artistic expression. If I can't own what I express, at least protect it from those who have a malicious intent. That's got to be the minimum, is to be able to protect it from people who will maliciously piss on it and deface it and destroy it. And I don't think that's so hard. I don't think that's some kind of terrible burden to create those kind of respectful rights, and they empower freedom. I mean, women should have the freedom to be on the internet without worrying about, being destroyed by crazy fucks who are going to post their name and address or do some other kind of shit and put them in harm. That's freedom. The freedom is to be protected from the irresponsible uses of speech. The more than irresponsible, the dangerous ones, let's say. The malicious. Again, it's just this word malicious. We have a public interest in preventing people from being malicious, from destroying the computer infrastructure merely because they can, creating viruses and malware and all this other crap. We have a public interest to stop people from doing that. And we have a right to protect. These minimum protections will expand freedom, not retract freedom. The freedom not to be harmed is a huge freedom. It's like walking with a parachute. It gives you liberty because you don't have to worry about falling now. You can walk right on the edge of the cliff and you have a parachute. And all that's taken away when we give rights to malicious propagandists, people who want to cheat and cut corners, people who don't respect the minimum obligation to show respect, minimum amount of respect. Call somebody an asshole. Don't call them a child molester. These are different things that you can get away with in different circumstances. And that kind of respect should be an obligation. And we shouldn't have to get caught up in these fucking petty wars where I have to fight back with malicious weapons. I wouldn't instigate a fight that way. And so if somebody's going to start low blowing, I'm going to have to do something to protect myself. And sometimes your only defense is a more brutal offense. Yeah, anyway, enough of a video. But the subject is obviously too complicated for the average YouTuber. The nuances of law and truth and consequences, they just couldn't be bothered with the truth, the practical facts, the reality of the circumstance. All they need is their hero worship, and they're off to the moron race, to the bottom. Anyway, until next time.